Today I'm going to try to draw this quaint street with a beautiful hospital building at the end here in Krakow, Poland. And as I sat down to record this voiceover, I struggled to think of something positive to say. Not about the drawing necessarily, but this wasn't a totally positive day of drawing. Real quick, as I've grown older, I've learned something specific and I think important about myself. And it's that I have an incredibly hard time faking anything. That sounds stupid and trite, I'm sure, to your ears, especially because you don't know me. But it's true. I think a lifetime of creative endeavors has put me here. It may be different for everyone, but my experience in any creative field has been informed by how I feel on the day. If for whatever reason I happen to be feeling down, the photos, for example, will reflect that. If I'm irritated, the practice of whatever I'm doing becomes the irritation. And regardless of how hard I try to disconnect them, they just stay glued together. Whether due to a bad night's sleep or a lousy meal, moods can change with the wind, as I'm sure some of you know. And just like with any other creative pursuit, it has an effect on my drawing. I'm less excited to look for scenes to draw. I find framing things for the video difficult. The people around me get just a little too close, as you can see here, and everything compounds and curtails the drawing itself. I say all of this because I know now that if I'm going to make more than, 27 of these, I need to make sure I'm not sugarcoating anything at the beginning. I don't want to be misleading here and pretend like everything is fine and dandy even when it's not. When I sat down to talk about this, of course I wanted to be lighthearted. I wanted to talk about how this drawing was this and that, and even since it was a little tough, maybe be a little self-deprecatory to a small degree. But even that would be putting on a little bit of a front, because the reality is that the only thing I think about when I look at this video or this drawing is the sour mood I was in. That said, I'm absolutely not saying even a word of this for your sympathy or comments or anything of that nature. If anything, I feel free to see this for what it really is, an opportunity for me to make, an honest voiceover for my YouTube channel. So please I do not need comments. I do not need any, oh, I hope you're feeling better. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm just doing it to be honest. I only mention any of this for the sake of keeping things honest for my own sake above all. I know that if I pretend for one video and that turns into 10, 20, 100, I'll be actually miserable, not just a little cranky like I guess I am today. Also, for what it's worth, I have something to talk about, which ultimately is a net positive. And it's not just about me, and my feelings or whatever. This kind of ebb and flow is just part of the process, part of any process. In fact, the other day, my wife and I were having a conversation, not too dissimilar to this one. And she asked if this learning to draw thing felt like other practices. She's big on yoga, and she's talked to me often in the past about how it's a practice and how it just because you can do something today doesn't mean you'll be able to do it tomorrow. These things, like I said, ebb and flow, and it's important to recognize it. None of it is linear, which feels untrue and impossible and unfair as it's happening. But the whole idea is that it's improving little by little over time through disciplined, dedicated persistence. I've been through this process before with plenty of other mediums time and time again, but this time I'm back at the starting line. I'm a beginner again, and I don't have these well-practiced techniques to fall back on or tricks up my sleeve to remedy my mistakes. I just have humility. That's all I can rely on at this stage. A week ago, I probably felt more confident in my abilities than I do today. Like I bounded up the stairs only to slip and fall back down. Fortunately, as I mentioned, I have these videos to refer back to. I can see proof of that not being the case, at least not completely. So, what feels like falling all the way back down the staircase is actually just a few steps, and I'm being ridiculous. Regardless, moving backward feels terrible. I just have to think of it realistically, like 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step, sometimes, unfortunately, 2 back. But as long as I'm consistent, I'll make them back up in no time and push forward once again. So actually, as I say this, just talking about this makes me feel a lot better about the whole thing. Um, and that's my entire point, I guess. Had I misled you and not, I don't think of it like that necessarily, but kinda, had I misled you, if I said things were going great, good or bad drawing, it doesn't matter. I think, no, I know I would have sunk down, just a little bit lower. So I'm glad we had this chat. Right. So let's talk about the drawing a little bit. Well, as is typical at this point in these videos, I didn't know where to begin. I chose this reference mostly for the building at the end of the street, the hospital building. So I give it most of my attention at the start. However, I wish I'd spent more time getting into the details because as much as I did want the entire street to be part of the drawing, my focal point was clear and I should have made it the priority. Everything I've said up until this point had me feeling pretty rushed. And I think that shows all the way through this one. My lines are wobbly and apathetic. I would have done much better if I'd chosen a quieter location as well, maybe one with less people around, but also less to consider in the scene. I think that would have been better for me. Like I said, I wanted the street to be part of the composition, but at some point, all of these components get distracting and they fracture my attention. I've drawn the cars, even though I wish they weren't really there to begin with. And I do so when the primary subject still lacks even basic detail. I've done a few drawings where I block everything in first, and I think this is generally a good habit to build, depending on the scene, like I've said. But since I knew that brick hospital was key, I wish I'd just spent my time on that. I would have rathered a flat facade, detailed with some care than whatever I end up making here. But that's all right. Again, it's all part of the process. On that note, I'm in this funny spot where I'm trying to find the balance between quick, confident lines and slow, considered ones. I've spoken way too much about confident lines on this channel, but when I say the second option, the slow and considered ones, I don't mean that as its opposite. I think both options have a lot in common, actually, and I'm not trying to posit some weird dichotomy. I just mean that certain artists sketch with these swift, reasonably accurate lines that have a detailed effect without being super precise. And then other artists I've seen use a slower, more thought out approach that produces less ambiguity, but it obviously takes a lot more time and often includes measuring and a bit more realism. Since I'm, where I'm at, today is not the day to talk in depth about that. I don't necessarily have the muscle memory to fit the first option, and I don't really have the time or patience for the second, at least for these videos. Also, the second option is something I have had experience with in the past. If you listen to the first video, you'll know that. Go back and listen to that, please. And that didn't make me any better at drawing unless I had a ruler and a computer screen, which is not the goal. However, and we're really in it now. Do I practice the first option, since that's candidly what I would like, even though it will result in poorer results in the present? And to what extent will that help me grow, even though the drawings themselves aren't as good, quote unquote, good, as they potentially could be? Obviously, all of this is rhetorical in nature, but if you have some thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them. So let me know in the comments. To wrap it up succinctly, do I continue to quickly draw my way to not so good drawings, or do I elongate the process by focusing on slow and considered drawings? I guess I already kind of have my answer, but let's hope it works out for me. Okay, awesome. So I'm noticing that scenes like these could be a lot better if I cared less about the environmental specifics, if that makes sense, and more about making whatever I manage to get on the paper look the best that it can. Had I spent more time with the details of the facade, this, I think, would be undoubtedly better. You can just see that everything is a little shaky, everything is a little wrong. I drew those cars in, and if you look at them, they're obviously bad, but they have like the bones of being something, but I just didn't commit to them. The only thing that I committed to at all was kind of getting every little thing in, which I didn't need to do. The central building, the focal point of the whole thing, is the most detailed, but I think only because I didn't have time to do everything else. Like I said, I wish maybe it would have been helpful if I'd drawn just the road leading up to this building, and maybe made something from my imagination, sort of deleted the tall buildings on the sides, the trees, the cars, and just had a road leading up to this building and, the front pillar, but also the whole building itself. I don't know. And maybe I can experiment with that more in the future. But like I said, today probably wasn't the best day for that. So anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one, especially all the tangents. These videos have and will always be tangential in nature to some degree. And hey, I think that's part of the fun. I really appreciate you for taking the time, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.